Afternoon to those who've joined, and welcome to our brief review of our industry survey results for the civil infrastructure industry for 2019. So let's get started. First, kind of the brief agenda. I'll tell you who I am, tell you what we did, what we learned, talk about ways this may impact you, and next steps. So keep it brief, to the point, and get you the information and get you back to your day. So first thing is me. I'm Kevin Breslin. I manage the infrastructure and reality capture services here at Imagine It. Been in the consulting side of the industry since '96, and prior to that came from the real world, as we like to call it, surveying and civil engineering, where I started in the mid-'80s and wound up where I am today. So that's a little bit about who I am. So the purpose of this survey, why are we even doing this in the first place? And the simple answer is we want to make sure that in addition to our daily interactions with our customers and the people we do business with that are reaching out to us for assistance with their technology needs, implementation of software, education, support, and actually purchasing software, we wanted to try to get the pulse of the industry to make sure that our perspectives and the points of view that we've developed through our interactions are an accurate reflection of what's going on in the industry. So for the last several years, we've been running this usually in the late spring, early summer. We'll run the survey. And this year, again in 2019, I believe this is the fifth, maybe no more than that. We've been doing this, I think, since 2011. So this would be our eighth run at the industry survey, and this year we had 240 organizations participating in the event. And what we do is we ask them a series of questions. A lot of it is multiple choice, and there's some, of course, fill in the blank options as well. But really, at the end of the day, it's designed for us to understand what's going on in the industry and make sure that we've got a good bead on it, so that as a services provider, someone whose business it is to serve the industry, that we're seeing things as clearly as possible. And we're sharing that with you, so you'll understand what we see, and maybe this will be impactful for you as you are dealing with either challenges or situations, or to just better understand what's happening throughout the U.S. and Canada. So the first thing that we ask is how organizations identify themselves and the types of services that they plan now or plan to provide in the future. And we've been seeing, and you'll see, one of the trends you'll see in this session today is there's a lot of trends that are still holding true. Some changes, of course, but a lot of things are pretty much the same. And what we've been seeing, and this has been happening over the last several years, is most of the organizations that we're dealing with seem to be anchored into where they're comfortable in the segments of the industry that they feel that they are serving and works well for them. So you'll notice that the already offering percentage is the highest, and the will provide within a year, or the 2 to 5 years, are the smaller of the numbers. And of course, we plan to never provide these services would probably be the second largest tier. And that pretty much holds true with the exception of reality capture, where despite, and we'll get into this more as we go through this, despite what some organizations felt to be the case, let's say 3, 4, 5 years ago, and their ability to interact in that or provide those types of services really was a very, very low number, and we're seeing that grow quite a bit, especially this year, a noticeable jump. So what we did, just to give some perspective over that same question and how people have responded over the last several years, from 2015 through 2019, for example, you can see a pretty clear trend that in most cases, things were, in the last few years, were growing, but not in huge leaps and bounds. And then here in 2019, it seems like there's been pretty much across the board a pretty big jump in a lot of these categories: land development, of course, survey, land development, probably most notable, or second most notable, but the most notable would again be reality capture, where in 2015, 21% of organizations thought that they would be in that business in some way, shape, or form, whereas in 2019 it's 42%. So it's literally doubled in the last few years. And I think, again, that speaks to the growth of the technology and the fact that it's becoming more commonplace, whether you're a service provider who generates reality capture data or you're on the other end, the receiving end, and you're consuming that data. The fact is it's being more and more commonly used. So quick summary on that topic is obviously continuous growth across the board for the most part, in some cases stronger, in some places more so than others. Reality capture has seen over the last several years, as we just saw, a pretty big jump in adoption and something that's being used more of a commonplace technology and or service in the industry. And also indications through some of the feedback we received is in addition to the primary tools and technologies, and we'll get into those here in a few seconds, that people are starting to take more advantage of the other tools and additional technology available through the AEC collection, which in the course of the last few years, a lot of organizations with Autodesk's licensing change, and there were some incentives, obviously, to make that change. A lot of organizations have gone to the AEC collection, and with that are able to take advantage of more technology. So we're seeing that actually coming to fruition. So regarding technology specifically, we ask what organizations, what do they use today? Basically, what technology are they using today? And CAD and BIM modeling is still on the growing side of things. Reality capture, it's a comparatively small number, but again, it's a much larger number than it was just a few years ago. And then cloud computing is actually something that's, in the 30% range, where again, a few years ago, we weren't seeing much of that at all. When we ask what do they plan on doing in the next 2 to 5 years, we're not seeing a whole lot more, obviously, as far as growing into CAD, but we are seeing 3D BIM modeling, 3D modeling in BIM, that big jump in reality capture that we were talking about, so the people that are looking at doing that more down the road, and cloud computing, which has really jumped considerably over the last few years. And this was one of the things that, again, just a few years ago, very few organizations, at least in the infrastructure world, were really giving much thought to the prospect of cloud computing as a means of not only performing processing, renderings, and things of that nature, but actually using that as a means of disseminating information and storing data. So I know that's a big change. So the technology trends are, again, reality capture and cloud computing are probably the most notable changes, but BIM modeling, CAD, of course, is still the top dog for obvious reasons. And for what it's worth, when people answer the question, they're talking about CAD versus BIM in the infrastructure context, there's still in the industry a lot of confusion about that. For example, a lot of organizations, if you ask, are they using BIM design for infrastructure, a lot of them would say no, and then if you ask them, well, what's your primary technology, and they'll tell you Civil 3D. Well, they are using. They may not think of it in that sense because they're, a lot of times BIM is associated to buildings, doors, walls, windows, roofs. They don't really associate that with infrastructure, but Civil 3D is BIM for infrastructure. So it's a little bit fuzzy, the distinction between CAD and 3D BIM modeling in the infrastructure context. So what do you use for work? What's your primary design tool? As everyone here is probably not surprised, Civil 3D is still by far the primary design tool today. Interestingly, despite the fact that it's 15-plus-year-old software, it's seen a almost 5% jump just from last year, where it was hovering in the 74% range as the primary tool for organizations. So we're still seeing growth in Civil 3D, which is kind of odd. Here's another interesting thing is this is the first time, I think, in memory that Land Desktop is not making an appearance on the list. And as most know, the program was retired in 2009, which makes it 10 years ago now. But we're glad to see most people have finally abandoned that and moved on to something else. I'm guessing maybe their computers that they had it installed on had just finally died and they were forced to get into something else. But the good news is people are finally moving on. Those hanging on to it are loosening their grip. As far as additional tools, and this is where we get into beyond the obvious, and this is also another good place to see that what I think is some of the confusion between what constitutes CAD and Civil 3D, but those two obviously are by far the strongest. I think AutoCAD, and specifically in many respects, is confused with Civil 3D, especially people in senior management who don't really understand that Civil 3D and AutoCAD in some respects are similar, but also in other respects they're different. So for that reason, I think we're always going to have a little bit of confusion there. But the obvious answer is they're very strongly represented here. The other thing that's interesting is InfraWorks, which has been around for several years now and has had a middling level of adoption, somewhat disappointing, I would say. This year, however, a pretty big jump in adoption, and I think that in large part is due to two things. One, the tool itself is becoming continuously more useful. It interacts a lot better with Civil 3D. We have the ability now to tap into ArcGIS online to get to geospatial data. And the fact that it's part of the AEC collection that most people, as we discussed before, are using now versus the singular licenses of Civil 3D or AutoCAD or MAP or what have you. So we're seeing a pretty big jump there. And as well as the collection as a whole being noted as something that's being used more beyond their primary design tool, the Civil 3D. So in summary, reality capture, again, we're seeing positive growth there. Civil 3D, despite the fact that it's 15 years old, still the top of the list and continues to grow. AutoCAD, of course, holding its position, its respectable position, probably in the second place. And then while, again, not the primary design tool, and foreseeable future, I don't see it being a primary design engineering tool, but in its space as a conceptual planning to get to that 20% mark or so in the design of a project, it's getting some traction, which is good to see. And then lastly, Land Desktop finally getting its well-deserved rest, and off to retirement it goes. Next category is CAD/BIM management. We've been asking this question not the entirety of the time we've been running these surveys, but in the last probably 5 years we've been asking this. And what we've learned is this year about just shy of 50% say that they have a full-time dedicated CAD manager. And then when we take a look back over the last few years, just to give you some perspective, it's bumped up a bit. So we were in the mid-40s in 2017, near 50 in 18, and we're probably pretty much in the same place right now. So there's been a slight increase over the last 3 years, but it's overall, it's fair to say that that percentage of organizations that have dedicated CAD management is pretty much unchanged. A related question is, for those who do have a dedicated CAD manager, what kind of things are they doing? Do we have a sense of the type of activities? Are they just putting out fires, basically reacting to issues that users are having and crashes and system problems and things of that nature? Or are they looking at more strategic objectives and helping the organization to stay on top of the technology, to keep the employees educated, to make sure that standards and processes are being consistently and uniformly used throughout the organization? And the short version is that this ratio is pretty much unchanged as well over the last 3 years. We're seeing pretty much the same balance. There's some unknowns in here, of course, depending on the persons that we talk to, but it seems as though they feel that the CAD managers are spending about half their time putting out fires and the other half doing things that are maybe more proactive and more strategic in nature. So it's good that organizations are still doing this. What's interesting is that, in fact, just very recently, we have an organization, a very large multidisciplinary engineering firm who's losing their CAD manager, and it is sending them into a tailspin because they have a bunch of new technology they're about to roll out with a lot of customization and some education associated with that. And the fact that they don't have a suitable replacement at this time is putting them in a tough situation, which is why they reached out to us. The point is, it's one of these situations that obviously there's value in what that person's doing for the organizational benefit, so that the entire corporation or the company is functioning at a higher level because they have somebody who's doing that. So when we ask, generally speaking, do you think if you don't have somebody on staff doing this, would you consider outsourcing it? And some will. Some, of course, say that they're not sure. There's pretty much always that in some respects. But no, we have no need for this. And that's just south of 50%. So about half have CAD managers. The other half don't think they need them for the most part. And it's interesting. I think that, in summary, that while the numbers haven't changed a lot, with the complexity of the technology and things like the AEC collection, which introduces an entirely new range of softwares and all of the potential applicable interactions with other related softwares, communication, data, manipulation, sharing, etc. So setting up standards, rolling out new software, keeping users educated. There's a strong need, and I would say probably a growing need for that. So it's something that it's not moving a lot right now. I suspect out of necessity it will in the not too distant future, again, just because the stuff is getting so hard, expecting end users, designers, and draftspeople to figure it out for themselves. At some point, that process is not going to yield any positive results. All right. Talking about data sharing and collaboration, this is another one that's always present in our surveys because it's becoming, or has been important, is becoming increasingly important. So when we ask the question, who do they share data with on projects, there's a very clear winner here. In fact, just a few years ago in 2015, while still the highest ranking answer, it's gone up substantially. North of 80% in just the last few years. So collaboration and sharing of project-related data internally and externally is growing. That's not going away. The siloing of data, which used to be the case back 10, 20 years ago, we're seeing far less of that, and that's a good thing. As far as how often do they share data, again, the clear winner here is most of the time. Some of the time, most of the time, nearly all of the time, rarely is the clear loser. And that really, at the end of the day, is the answer that we're looking for. So we're seeing a lot more collaboration, sharing of data between internal shareholders and of course, external customers and recipients of data. So that's all positive, and that trend is continuing. And again, the most of the time answer has jumped, again, just from 2018, has jumped up about 5 points or so. So that's a great trend. Now, when they're sharing the data, with external partners specifically, how often are they on the same version, same product, but not the same version, different platforms, and then how many just rely on PDFs? And you can see we got a mixed bag of answers here. We're seeing less of the same product but not the same version, which is interesting. Over the last few years, it seems that we've had more consolidation on the versions and or in the case of Civil 3D specifically, because we have, depending on what version you're on, there's a broader range of versions where there is compatibility. I know some of the more recent versions, we don't have as much of that downward compatibility, but upward compatibility, of course, has always been the case, and that still is in place. But the interesting part is PDFs still the predominant means noted for organizations who are sharing data outside of their organizations. And that has been the case for years, and apparently it's not budging. That's still the preferred way of sharing information. So file sharing, data sharing is still increasing, continuing to grow. PDF is still the king. That's the preferred method. Granted, there's other ways to do that, but that's what people seem to gravitate towards. And there's also challenges. So we didn't get into the weeds here on the specifics, but some of the feedback we got as far as what type of challenges they're having, there's a whole litany of things. But the challenges are also still there. Another thing that we're starting to see noticeable change with is the adoption of technologies like Autodesk's Vault and very recently, for the infrastructure people at least, BIM 360, which is starting to gain traction and use in the infrastructure side of things, which BIM 360 has been around. BIM 360 Docs and some other variations had been predominantly used on the building side and maybe to a lesser extent on manufacturing, but there wasn't a whole lot of adoption on the infrastructure side. But in the last 6 to 8 months, I'd say, we're starting to see where people are asking about this more, and they're actually using it. And I think we can expect down the road more of that to happen and to continue. So when we talk about business concerns and practices, this is another question we've been asking for years and try to get a gauge on how often our customers reassess or reevaluate their fees, so how they're charging their customers. And the winner this year is a good even 50% evaluate every year. So this is perceived, I guess, as a good sign in the sense that organizations are willing to consider changing their fees more readily than they were 3 to 5 years ago, for example, where this was a smaller number. And I think that, again, this is a good indication that businesses generally feel confident that they can have this kind of volatility in their fees for their customers as the market continues to grow, and the potential for more money to be made is there. So that's actually considered a good sign in most respects. Another good sign is how organizations are looking at their staffing situation. So this year we asked, or we've been asking this actually for years, is do organizations intend to increase staff, decrease, keep the staff, or there's people who and sometimes involved in this that don't really know what the organization's plans are. But this year, over 50% are looking to increase staff. And I can say from my own personal experience here, where I am in southeast Michigan, that just through the grapevine, I know of at least 6 engineering firms within 20 miles of my house that are looking for multiple people, designers and engineers and surveyors, project managers. The virtual, the electronic want ads, if you will, are just chock full of that stuff. So obviously these organizations are still on a growth trajectory, and they apparently have a high level of confidence. And as far as the hiring goes, just from last year, it's gone up from 45 to about 51%. In just 1 year. So again, another good indication that in the industry as a whole, business prospects, they seem to feel confident about that. Another business challenge is keeping people educated. How do organizations keep their people on top of the technology? So we've been talking about, of course, Civil 3D and AutoCAD, but things like InfraWorks and Navisworks, and now we're seeing more commonplace people looking at Revit or Recap. So there's a wide range of technologies that people really, to fully take advantage of what the tools are at their disposal, they're going to need to know how to use these things in some way, shape, or form. And whether it's paid-for learning, free learning, remote, formal in-person classroom training, webinars, etc., the clear winner, of course, is free. Everyone likes free. It's the right price. So that is and continues to be the number one answer. Some of the other answers that we received that fell into the other bucket are none. So some organizations claim they have no way of really getting educated. And then next would be peer-to-peer or internal training. But as far as what the leaders are, by far e-learning, and then we have paid for self-paced learning. That's, for example, the Productivity Now services that Imagine it offers. That's one of the services that we have. And then, of course, webinars and other free sources. But free is the king here. Next question was regarding roadblocks or reasons organizations don't adopt new technology. And the big players here, of course, are cost and time. And the numbers have shifted a little bit over the last few years, but these two have been by far the top 2 defined reasons why organizations are not adopting new technology. The software costs and the implementation costs, and then, of course, the time. And the last few years, these two things have been kind of neck and neck as far as what the problems is. And as far as some of the other goes, some organizations say they do adopt new technology, and they don't really perceive that as a roadblock. And then there's probably the next on the list would be lack of support from management. A lot of organizations say that there's no budget or there's no time allotted and really no interest in pursuing the use of different or newer technologies. But the number 1 and number 2 are still software implementation costs and, of course, time to implement. So for the next, we had a more or less a fill-in-the-blank type of answer here. So the question is, what is your biggest challenge in completing projects on time and on budget? And the top answer this year, and I think this was number 2 last year, is insufficient time allotted. So budgets, the time schedules are tighter than they should be, at least from the designer and the engineer's perspective. Some cite issues with the software, complications with the software crashing, and inabilities of the software. Customer changes and demands, and this a couple years ago was actually number 1, and for some reason this has dropped to number 3. In that basically scope creep, customers changing their minds at the last minute, pushing for more, and making it more difficult to stay on track as far as project schedule goes. Designers and engineers' lack of education, standards and workflow, which is another big one that despite the fact, again, Civil 3D, 15 plus years old, there's still a lot of organizations that struggle with having their environments properly configured, standards defined and enforced. That creates chaos, and that chaos costs time and, of course, keeps these people from hitting their targets on budget. And then the other one is insufficient staff, which is somewhat new. It's been in the mix for several years, but it's growing as far as where it's ranking as far as a challenge. And again, the fact that over 50% of the customers surveyed are looking for people, I think that makes sense. And then communication, data collaboration, internal communication issues. So similar results. The positioning has changed a little bit on these, but it's the usual suspects, if you will, as far as what those challenges are. The next question is, what is the biggest challenge in winning new projects? So the top answers are, and this one is always, I shouldn't say always, as far as I can remember, this has been the number 1 answer, which is price competition. And our industry, I think, has really got this down to a science on how to beat each other up on prices. Skill set, not having the means and the ability to deliver certain things. A good example, working with actually 2 organizations in the last few weeks here that are frantically trying to get up to speed on reality capture, looking at buying scanners and getting training and buying software and getting a server set up to manage the data, not because they had planned on it, but because they basically stumbled into an opportunity that if they had this set up, then they could get this work, and I think you can fill in the blanks there. So they're in a panic trying to get these things done as quickly as possible because the work that they're trying to get is predicated on them having those skills and, of course, the software and the technology. Again, staffing shortages still plays a part in the ability to win new business. So a lot of similar results. Some of the things, the positions have changed a bit, but not too terribly surprising. So general consensus in the business class here, if you will, is most organizations apparently are feeling optimistic about business prospects. More than half are hiring. That said, we still have some of the same struggles we've had for the last several years: growth, retention, and development. Technologies play in that. Difficulty getting people educated on the technology and the growing list of titles of technology they need to be educated on. And then, of course, the time needed to get educated, get it implemented, set up the standards, et cetera. Those are obviously big factors. And then project-related challenges, those I think are still going to be the same. Customers will probably never stop changing their minds and pushing for more. I think that's safe to say that will always be the case. I guess one of the things to keep in mind is while it's unlikely we can expect our customers to stop changing their mind and wanting more, especially at the last minute, is if you can't change that, then what can you do to mitigate the impact that those changes have on you? Having the right people with the right skill set, the right technology to react to those changes faster can minimize the negative impact that those last-minute changes and boundary-pushing requests from the customers have. It would seem like a good remedy for that. So those are the basic findings. I just actually published a blog post on this. It's on the Imagine It site yesterday. So there's some more information there if you're interested. But as far as next steps go, a couple things to keep in mind. And I think this speaks now as much, if not more than ever before, is I think one of the biggest things that organizations, a challenge they have is the ability to find and keep people and keep those people running at top-level efficiency. And while investments from an organization perspective, rent and hardware and software, of course, there's all of those things. But the people, at the end of the day, is in our industry is where the greatest investment is. Having the right people with the right skills and the ability to do the things we need them to do. That's where the rubber hits the road. So making sure they have the right software, the right tools. They are operating in an environment that's been optimized to foment high levels of productivity, keep users from having to reinvent the wheel by recreating styles or changing standards on the fly because there's nothing sufficiently set up in the first place, or they're not educated on how to use the tools that they have. So making sure that we're providing them with the means to be successful. And not only does that allow them to hire or operate at a higher level of efficiency and productivity, there's a greater level of satisfaction from employees. People feel that if the organization is willing to invest in them and give them the tools and to help them grow as individuals and to broaden their abilities, they feel satisfied. So I think everybody understands that basic principle here. And then, of course, the greater efficiencies equal faster, smarter, and your ability to be more competitive as an organization. So things that ImagineIt can do, and of course, I have to say this because this is what we do. We offer a lot of services that can help with these things. Of course, the software, I think everyone understands that. But education, a wide range of education solutions that we offer, and that covers pretty much every imaginable way you can think of, from standard classroom training to self-paced e-learning. We have that and everything in between available, whether it's something out of the box, standardized training, or if you want something custom created for you, we can do that, of course. Implementation-based services, setting up environments, creating and developing standards, disseminating that information in an optimized environment in an organization to make sure everybody's rowing in the same direction. We have a series of assessment and recommendation services that, per the name, are designed to allow us to work with an organization to, from an outside perspective, taking our collective experiences to interview the organization, project key personnel within the organization, do things like knowledge smart assessments to understand where people stand with technical proficiency, and then provide prescriptive recommendations as to making changes, whether that's changing your processes, your workflows, some form of education, the way that you're collaborating, et cetera. The answers are always different. The point is, we have 16 people on the team that all come from the industry, that some of which have been around, like myself, for decades. So we've seen a lot of what our customers have done and have a good wealth of experience and knowledge and knowing what works, and unfortunately in some cases through our customers vicariously learning what doesn't work. And we can take all that information and provide you with something that can get you to where you need to be sooner than later. Automation, we have a dedicated programming team within ImagineIt. So they create software, they create augmented functionality for the tools you have now, or can create software from whole cloth and build something entirely unique specifically for your organization. And then with the productivity now, which covers the best-in-class dedicated technical support, dedicated being the key word, meaning the people that are doing technical support at ImagineIt, that's what they do. They're not training classes. They're not flying on planes to set up a training lab across the country. They're at their desks answering the phones or web or email, but they're dedicated. They're all from the industry, and that's their job. That's all they do. And then also the e-learning. So I talked about that earlier, but we have had and been growing and developing our e-learning and learning management tools over the last several years, and now enhanced with Pinnacle series, which allows us to offer a very broad range of e-learning technology, existing content, custom content, where people can set up learning paths and create things that are uniquely catered to a given organization or to a given group of people. You can track their progress. You can have them take tests, and as managers, you can track their results and all of that. So bottom line is, we can offer a lot of solutions and assist you, even though things are going well for the industry, which is great. But we can help you make things a little bit better if need be. So if you have any challenges, any questions, reach out to us. Meanwhile, I'm at the end of my notes here, and if there's any questions, Katana, I'd be happy to take them.
Yes, you have a couple questions. One was approximately how large is the data set?
The data set. I'm not sure.
The survey, how many people responded?
This year was 200. This year was 240 organizations.
Wonderful. Next questions. Are you seeing a trend with companies moving towards a greater understanding of data, data management, data science, instead of straight to engineering design?
We are. I'd say that going back to the comments on cloud computing, for example, and using means of sharing and collaborating beyond the box that's sitting on the desk, we're seeing more awareness of that, and again, more willingness to consider and in some cases use those technologies in the infrastructure world. It's not overwhelming. It's still, I'd say, on the burgeoning side of things, but we're definitely seeing more interest in that and awareness of it now than we were even just a few years ago.
Wonderful. Well, that's all the questions I have for right now. Thank you so much,
Excellent.
Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for your time.